Hello, everybody, and welcome to this evening's very special 5 by 15 event. We are thrilled to be bringing together this incredible lineup of outstanding writers and thinkers to share their thoughts and stories on topics ranging from education to homelessness, from race to consumerism, climate change, comedy, class, and workplace rivalry. And I think all these writers challenge us to see the world in a different way. We are thrilled also to have over 700 people signed up for this evening, and we'll be sharing a link to watch the webinar again tomorrow with everyone who's registered. So tweet us, let us know what you think, and do not forget to get our speakers' incredible books. New and Bookshop will be delighted to help you, and we'll be putting the details in the chat. So without much further ado, I will introduce our very first speaker this evening. Joining us all the way from America, we have Zakiya Dalila Harris. She is the author of The Other Black Girl. It's at once a gripping thriller and a witty piece of social commentary, and it was an instant New York Times bestseller when it came out. It's one of the most talked about debut novels of the year, and as Attica Locke has said, it's the funniest, wildest, deepest, most thought-provoking ride of a book. So welcome, Zakiya. Thank you very, very much for being with us, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Daisy, for that wonderful intro. And thank you for having me today. I'm so excited to be here. I'm coming to you from Brooklyn, New York. It's a little early in the day, but I'm, again, just thrilled that you all are here, and I'm thrilled that I get to appear alongside these amazing authors. In a nutshell, The Other Black Girl follows a young Black woman named Nella Rogers. She's been the only Black person working at Wagner Books for the last 2 years, which means a lot of things for her. The biggest thing is it means she has to handle all of the microaggressions on her own from her white colleagues. So Nella's really thrilled when Hazel, another Black woman who is so cool, so down from Harlem, starts working in the cubicle next to Nella. Nella thinks, awesome, I have an ally. I have someone to talk about natural hair with. I have someone to just kvetch with about all of this baggage that comes with being the only one in a white space. But things do not go that easily for Nella. She starts to receive these strange notes at work, and she slowly begins to wonder about Hazel's true intentions. So that's the main story, but unfolding alongside that story are the stories of 3 other Black women, Shani, Kendra Ray, and Diana. They're all also tied to the world of publishing, and all have to navigate being Black women in this white-dominated space. And all 4 of these Black women are tied to a very sinister, chilling secret that has implications for them, but also for Black people all over the world. So this story is very close to me. Some might say a little too close. I myself worked in book publishing for 2.5, close to 3 years. I worked in editorial, first as an assistant and then as an assistant editor. So I know a lot, of course, about the publishing world. I actually started writing this book at my desk after having an encounter with a Black woman in the bathroom at work, and experiencing that same feeling that Nella experiences in this novel of, oh, there's someone else here, like someone else who knows what it's like to be the only one here. But unfortunately, we didn't have like a sister moment. She did not acknowledge me for whatever reason. It's the bathroom. But after that, I went back to my desk and started thinking about, these 2 kind of truisms within the Black community that I'd grown up knowing and hearing. And one of those was, of course, when you're the only other Black person in a space or walking down the street, even in Brooklyn or parts of the city, you nod at the other Black person. You acknowledge them because there's just a sense of community and kinship there. But there's also this joke and unfortunately a reality that sometimes we have to compete against one another because there's this idea that there can only be one of us. So what does it look like when those two very different themes are kind of coming up against one another? So I really wanted to explore that through Nella and Hazel's relationship, and also a few other female relationships in this book. So I'm going to go back a little bit. because I would be remiss not to tell you that I have been the only one for a lot of my life. So this is not just a publishing thing. I grew up in a very white suburb in Hamden, Connecticut, much like my character Nella grew up in Connecticut. I see similarities. And I was raised by, of course, my parents to understand the significance of understanding where I came from as a Black person who left home every day to go to a school that was mostly white. So there are 2 other Black kids in my grade usually, but we'd be distributed evenly among the classes. So I never got to have that diversity experience myself. I was the diversity for other kids. And so that affected a lot of things about me. It affected how I felt about myself, what I wanted to do to my hair. I started relaxing it when I turned 10 because I wanted to have straight hair. All the song lyrics to Rod Stewart, or all the lyrics to Rod Stewart songs. And so I had this very interesting kind of, mostly having white friends outside of the home and then coming home. And then of course, learning all of those Black things that I needed to know about where I came from. So I had my feet in these 2 different worlds for a lot of my life. And then I got to middle school, high school, and met other Black kids who are not family members. And oftentimes the question was, why do you talk like a white girl? Why do you participate so much in school from other Black students? So that kind of confused me. And it's something that took me years to really get over because I constantly was, measuring myself up against other forms of Blackness that I was seeing. So that's a little bit of where I came from and where a lot of the seeds for this book came. But I didn't really think about those kind of things exactly and how they're influencing me until I, first when I went to college at UNC Chapel Hill in the down south. And then after that, I did my MFA at the New School in creative writing, in nonfiction, I should say, because I got waitlisted for fiction. And it was the best thing that could have happened to me. In my higher education, I started to take classes that I wasn't offered in high school. I had Black professors for the first time, really, as I got older. And I took a lot of Black lit courses because I was an English literature major. So I was getting to know Amiri Baraka for the first time, Lucille Clifton. I was learning a lot about James Baldwin. And around this time, I was also freshly moved to New York for my master's degree. And this was 2014, 2015, and New York City was on fire. The country was on fire because of police shootings and murders that were gone unpunished. And so I was experiencing all of these things through the news, through turning the corner and running into a protest in New York City, and then also reading James Baldwin and realizing how much of my own experiences really were shaped by where I was from, where I grew up. And I came to this realization that, no matter how well-spoken I am, no matter what I wear, I am also simply a Black woman. I'm moving through this country and a lot of people will just see me as that and make their assumptions about me regardless of what I say or what I do. And it made me feel really helpless, I'm not gonna lie. And it really made me examine myself and what I would do with that knowledge. And all of those things, again, go into this book, The Other Black Girl, because all of these characters have to, again, navigate how much of themselves they bring to work, how much of themselves they put into a box to make acceptable for white people, how true they will be to themselves, and whether or not success is worth it, right? And so that's something that influenced this book. And then this idea also that you have to, again, compartmentalize yourself, which everyone does going into work, right? The work-life balance is something we all talk about, but what does it mean when you're a Black person working in a space that you really have to compartmentalize yourself? Even though the world of publishing does ask you to bring your opinions, your ideas, a lot of times it wants you to bring certain kinds of ideas. And depending on what's in vogue with Black thought or what people are protesting, that kind of affects whether or not publishing will listen to you. It's the sad truth. And so that was something that, you know, I was thinking about a lot, even before publishing, working in a cupcake shop, seeing the news and processing everything, and then having to put a smile on my face, the way that these characters in the book have to do. So that's my little rambling explanation of the book and the inspirations. But I want to lastly say, you know, this book covers a lot of different things. While race is a huge factor in this book, a lot of it's also workplace relationships, what it's like to be someone who is making not a lot of money, struggling to make ends meet as an assistant position, and having a boss who has like 3 vacation homes, what those conversations look like, what a conversation with a white author who doesn't see that the Black character they wrote is problematic. How do you navigate all of those things when there is also class and gender? All of those things are wrapped up in it. And I think ultimately, again, what the price of success is. Do you continue to kind of move within the system the way these characters, some of them might decide to do? I don't want to spoil anything, but do you continue to move within the system in the hopes that you're able to get to the top and bring other people along with you? Or do you be more radical? That's something that Black people, we have been discussing, I think, as a community for years, since slavery. And it's something that there's no easy answer to. And there's no easy answers to a lot of the things in this book, I like to add, but I do really hope that it just spurs discussion, hard conversations. And I really hope it makes everybody, readers of all races, all professions, all classes, look inward and really question what diversity means, what meaningful diversity means, how we can help one another, both in the workplace, but also in the world. So that is my little spiel on the other Black girl. I hope I didn't go over time, but thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the book.
Zakiya, thank you so much. We loved listening, and it was wonderful to have you back with us and to find out some of the context and ideas and stories that have gone into The Other Black Girl. And if people haven't already got a copy, then I know that they will be rushing to the bookshop to get a copy and to read it now after hearing you. So thank you so much, Zakiya. And we will see you again soon. We hope in person next time.
Absolutely.
And next up, we have the fantastic Lucy Kellaway, who is known to all of us from her amazing work on the FT for many, many years as a leading writer. But she's here to tell us about something very different and her new book, which is called Re-Educated: How I Changed My Job, My Home, My Husband, and My Hair. It's a love song to education and is also a tale about starting again later on in life. And we're so pleased that she's back with us at 5 by 15. She's a complete inspiration to all of us. So over to you, Lucy, and welcome.
Thank you, Daisy. Well, look, it's almost 4 years ago to this day that I was at the Tabernacle talking at a 5 by 15 event. That day, I remember it well. I was drenched in sweat. The reason wasn't the charming Notting Hill Gate audience and the wine that we were all drinking. It was that I had just begun as a trainee teacher in a really tough school in Hackney. And I think that very day I'd been taken aside by my mentor and told that there were 32 mistakes that I had made in just one lesson. It was completely hideous. To refresh my memory this morning, I just watched me giving that talk, and I did actually put a very brave face on it, but that was because I had to. Because it wasn't just me starting again in this school. I'd set up this organization called Now Teach to encourage all sorts of other aging professionals like me to junk whatever cushy job they had been doing and become teachers too. So for me to own up to the fact that I was practically dead with how hard it was really wasn't going to be the thing at all. back then, I remember various people, various of my Zakiya FT colleagues and quite a lot of FT readers were saying that I was just doing this because I'd run out of things to write about. And they eagerly awaited the book that I would write before I quit teaching about how I had reinvented myself. Anyway, it's slightly galling to prove those critics right. I have indeed just written that book, which, as you said, Daisy, is called Re-Educated. But they weren't altogether right. I didn't quit teaching. I haven't quit teaching. I'm now 4 years in, finally able to answer honestly when people say, are you loving teaching? I can now finally say yes. But what I wanted to talk about this evening were 3 surprising things that I've learned, and I'm going to do them in order of niceness, starting from the least nice. I guess when I started out sort of changing my life, I did it because I was kind of fed up with myself. I really wanted to reinvent me. Have I been successful in that? No, I'd have to say it's been a total flop. Inside, privately, I think I've changed. I think I'm nicer. I mean, obviously I'm nicer. I used to spend my whole life writing really mean interviews and sarky columns. Now I spend my whole life trying to help children, most of whom come from quite deprived backgrounds. Doesn't that make me a nicer person? Surely I'm humbler too. I used to be quite good at my job because I've been doing it for so long. I then had to endure humiliation from 32 teenagers all at once. You know, if that doesn't make you humble, what does? But I'm an economist. I now teach economics. I'm a social scientist. So I thought I better not take my own word for it. And I decided to send a mass email to the 12 people who know me best, including my children, always a mistake, saying, have I changed? Alas, 12 out of 12 emailed back saying no. One of them pointed out I was never particularly nice to start off with. She saw no further signs of niceness. And one of my daughters said, commenting on the mass email, is this humble? So there we go. So that was a complete flop. The next thing is slightly better, I think. In deciding to change my life so radically, I don't think I was weird at all. I think I was absolutely bog standard. The more I work with Now Teach, which by the way has now recruited 500 aging professionals to the classroom, which I'm really, really proud of. But not just them, but all of the people I meet, there is definitely this thing that most people, by the time they reach their, I don't know, it's different ages for all sorts of people. For me, it was late 50s. For some people, it's earlier, for others later. But they kind of get fed up with whatever they're doing. They want to do something new. And this is something that I don't think companies or governments have really woken up to. It's not that we should do something about this for poor people like me who are a bit bored. I mean, I don't care about poor people like me who are a bit bored. It's just what a waste of all of our experience in not having new things to train us in. So there's that. Actually, when I wrote the piece in the FT saying I was launching Now Teach, some wag wrote underneath, where's the scheme for all the burnt out teachers who want to become journalists? And I thought, exactly, where is it? Because, you know, I think that there is this common motivation that runs through so many of us. I see it again and again on people's CVs. There's 2 things. The first is selfish. We want to learn something new. I'd stopped learning anything new ages ago at the FT. And now I learned something new every day. I'm now actually this September, I'm in a whole new school in Tower Hamlets in East London. I'm now teaching, I think almost, my students are almost 100% Bangladeshi, and I teach economics A-level for the first time. So boy, am I learning a lot. I also wanted to be useful. You're not particularly useful as a sort of, sarky columnist, not particularly. But now every day, some child has learned something that they didn't know that morning. I mean, what could be more useful than that? And actually, if you want a specific example, I remember a couple of years ago, I was teaching a student called Bashir. He was a smart but lazy and thoroughly irritating little boy who sat sort of not really listening through my lessons until I let slip one day how much investment bankers earn. He stayed behind after class and said to me, "Miss, how do I become an investment banker?" And I said, "Well, Bashir, you have got to work a bit harder. You need to get a 9 in your GCSE economics. You need to get an A star in your A level. You need to go to a brilliant university." Anyway, I'm happy to say 3 years later, Bashir got a 9 in his economics A level. He's gone to a brilliant sixth form college. And though I didn't go into teaching to swell the bloated ranks of investment bankers, the day that Bashir gets a job at Goldman Sachs, I'm going to be the happiest woman alive. So there's that. The third thing is that people say to me often, "You were so brave in changing your career and doing what you did." And to them, I say, no, I wasn't brave. And what turns out, this, I just wouldn't have expected this in a million years, that starting again at my age was an absolute walk in the park, despite what I said earlier about all that sweat, compared to what 22-year-olds go through. For me, I knew who I was. My ego was secure. I'd already proved myself at one thing. And most brilliant of all, I wasn't trying to get promoted. I don't actually care what my bosses think of me. So my working life is so much less stressful than my young colleagues, which is just completely brilliant. And I can report back from the front line and say that for the first time, I'm now 62 years old. I've been in the workforce for 40 years. For the first time in my life, I am working for I'm teaching for the sake of teaching. It's not for status, it's not for showing off, it's not for any of the other things. It's for the sake of it. And God, that's brilliant. So 4 years from now, for me, well, I've learned I love change. Change is completely fab. But actually, if I'm still teaching these same girls, or well, it won't be the same ones because they will have left, but you know what I mean, they're sisters. If I'm still teaching their sisters economics A level in 4 years' time, I will be jolly pleased. But if I'm doing something else, well, change is great. As for this event, I really hope I'm not invited to speak here in 4 years' time. And the reason for that is that I hope it will just be so commonplace that everybody will have ripped up their lives and started all over again at round about 60, give or take a decade, that no one will really want to hear it. That would be the most amazing result. Anyway, now, thank you very, very much for having me. I wish we were back in the tabernacle, but there we go.
Lucy, thank you so much for being back with us. It's so wonderful to hear about how it's been going and to know that you are enjoying teaching and that you must be making such a big difference to the lives of so many young people. We are super grateful, and Re-Educated is out now. So I hope that everybody will get a copy. Thank you so, so much. And we will see you again very soon. So next we have Hannah Rothschild, who is a writer, an award-winning documentary filmmaker and a businesswoman, and she returns to 5 by 15 to discuss her latest novel, House of Trelawny, about an eccentric, dysfunctional family of aristocrats and their crumbling stately home, and about how the lives of women are still shaped by the ties of family. She is also the author of The Improbability of Love, which won the Bollinger Everyman Woodhouse Prize for comic writing and was shortlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction. We are very, very pleased to have you back with us, Hannah, and over to you.
Thank you, Daisy. And it's really, really nice to be back, particularly amongst such awesome fellow presenters. Lucy, actually, I did. It took me till I was 50 to write a book because I didn't have the confidence until then. I didn't think I had anything to say. And so I didn't change my career, but I did finally get my dream together. The House of Trelawny is the story of old money, new money, and no money. It's the first part of what I hope is going to be a trilogy, and it's set during the crash of 2008. And it makes fun of people and institutions which, in my opinion, take themselves too seriously, which or whom I should say. So Trelawney Castle itself was built 800 years ago, and it's been continuously occupied by the same family. For many centuries, that family did very well, from agriculture, from mining, and mainly from switching allegiances to whichever the winning side happened to be at that moment. But over the last couple of centuries, they got better at spending than making money. So when we meet our family, the Trelawnys, they're living off packets of frozen mints and huddling around the only 2 radiators that work in their vast house. Every time somebody hears a crash of falling ceiling, they just close the door and move to another room. So by one radiator, we have the elderly Earl and Countess of Trelawney, and by the other radiator, we have Kitto, his wife Jane, and their three completely feral children. There's also great Aunt Tuffy, who is an expert in fleas, but she refuses to go anywhere near her family and just wears lots and lots of jumpers. So here we are in 2008, Kitto, handsome, entitled, debonair, and completely financially illiterate, decides to shore up the family fortunes by taking a large bet on the London stock market. The crash happens, he loses everything. This cataclysm brings his long-lost sister Blaise, who happens to be rather good at finance, back into the fold, an unwanted illegitimate child, and the family's nemesis, an American hedge funder called Sir Tomlinson Sleet. There are 3 main female protagonists. One will find love, one will die, and the other one will lose everything, ... So I'm often asked where stories come from. For me, a novel is a collision of different ideas and themes, and some of these have been swirling around in my mind for a very long time, decades very often. And The House of Trelawny, the first part, came while I was clearing out an old trunk, and I found a letter from a friend of mine called Millie, who's still probably my closest friend for 40 years. And I sat there thinking, what on earth would have happened if I hadn't had this friendship? And I rely, as many people do, on my girlfriends as much as on my family. And actually, that became the first theme of the book, was female friendship and its absence as well as its presence. The second part, I love a saga. Who doesn't love a saga? And in fact, if I look at the history of books that I've loved, they're very often families over time. I think about the Cazalet Chronicles, I think about Buddenbrooks, I think about Nancy Mitford, I think about Elena Ferrante's Neapolitan Quartet. The joy of seeing the same people evolve and age over time. And I wondered if I could do the same thing. And then, of course, I had to find a family. That was my theme too. Then on the morning of September the 15th, 2008, this is my past career, the one before I did now, I was making a documentary feature about an interior designer called Nikki Haslam for the BBC. And we went to Moscow. And between the time that we took off in London and the time we landed in Moscow, the world changed, in my opinion. I turned on the television in my hotel room and I saw the employees of Lehman Brothers carrying all their files out in cardboard boxes. And then I watched the stock market and the ticker tape turn from green to red. And I saw the value of shares halve, quarter, and in some cases literally disappear like sand falling out of a bottle. And that very night, I watched the designer and his friends spend hundreds of thousands of dollars buying work by Damien Hirst that was at auction in London. And it was such a strange disconnect, kind of Nero was playing the fiddle while Rome burned, I think the expression is. I believe then, as I believe now, that what happened in 2008 was that all those structures we had implicitly trusted, those national institutions, those central banks, those governments, let us down profoundly. And we realized that they never actually had our best interests at heart. And I felt that we were and we are living in a global society which was morally and figuratively bankrupt. And that's what I wanted to write about. And that was what I put my people through, my family through. But actually, underneath all that, I wanted to write about love, different kinds of love, familial love, fraternal love, maternal love, uxorial, sisterly, romantic. And I should say a little kind of moment of personal revelation is that at the time, and perhaps for quite a long time at that time, I'd been on my own. I was in a bit of an emotional desert. Lots of things were going well. My work was going well. My friends, most importantly, my children were well. But my romantic life had been on an extended holiday, let's put it that way. So I decided to make my central character, Blaise, rather like me, someone, you know, who hadn't had that nice experience for a long time, and to play Eros. And I shot the arrow of love at her. And I thought, if I can't have it, then she can. And I created a very, very romantic, glorious suitor for her. Now, the next thing people sometimes ask is, okay, so you've got your ideas and you've got your characters, and then what do you do? Well, dreaming up a book is fun. That's the good bit. And of course, the not so much fun bit is actually sitting down and writing it. I think in words, in pictures rather than words. And what I tend to do is I get a big sheet of paper and I start scribbling all over it, and I put lines here and lines there and bubbles, etc., etc. And then I have a shoebox, and in the shoebox, I put all sorts of other stuff, photographs, old banknotes, postcards, ideas, train tickets, etc., etc. It's not the way I would recommend writing. It's extremely inefficient. As we know, proper writers, and I don't still consider myself a proper writer, but someone like Jane Austen actually maps out every single conversation, every single walk, every single meal that any of her characters have. So that when she starts, she knows what's going to happen, quite unlike me. Many writers treat their vocation like a job. Martin Amis famously has a boiled egg and then sits at his desk for 10 hours. Murakami gets up at 4, he works for 5 to 6 hours, then he runs 10 kilometers, can you imagine? Swims for 1,500 meters, sometimes both, mind boggles. Not my life. I actually have a day job, another completely different 9-to-5 existence. Part of that is finance, and part of it is helping to look after Wadston Manor, a beautiful stately home, which used to belong to our family, but now belongs to the National Trust. And as you can imagine, huge old houses and finance was pretty helpful with the plot of this book. Sometimes I think if I didn't have a job, I'd be a better writer because I'd have more time, but then I wonder what the hell I'd write about. Anyway, so having amassed all this information, my shoebox, my colored pencils, my big pieces of paper, I then have to start writing. And I treat my books like a secret lover. I take the manuscript, I go to coffee shops, I go to hotels, I go to the park, and I start hammering away on my computer. As I said, I had this idea it was going to be 3. The first is 2008. The second will be set in kind of Brexit, 15, 16. And the last one, I suspect, if we haven't had enough by then, will be pandemic related. It's quite fun having the same characters and following them, but they are also rather stubborn and incalcitrant. Let's take Clarissa, the Countess of Trelawney. She's wonderfully grand and self-important. She feels sick if she wakes up and doesn't look out of the window at her own land. The thing is, if I want to make her do something different, it's very, very difficult. Then, of course, the other big decision you have to make as a writer is what's the tone? What kind of voice are you going to use? I've always loved satire, whether it's Shakespeare's Twelfth Night or Nancy Mitford or Catch-22, Evelyn Waugh. Maybe because I don't like taking life too seriously, but maybe also I think that humor is a very good way of exploring big themes. And who, frankly, can take aristocrats terribly seriously? They're big people sitting in the House of Lords, flashing their titles. They often have more windows than brain cells. Anyway, in the end, spoiler alert, my lot have moved out of the big house and into a small cottage. As for Blaise, well, I had a lot of fun writing about her ideal man. I made him middle-aged and very handsome. He'd been quite successful, but he'd come to the conclusion, perhaps rather like one of Lucy's friends, that there were better things in life, like the environment. And then he bought a small farm and he started to work that land. He was single, of course, when they met. Lucky old Blaise. If only I had a novelist masterminding my own love life. Anyway, after 2 years of writing and rewriting this book, I sent it off to my agent. I pressed the send button and I went out to lunch. As it happened, it was quite a big lunch. There, and this is a true story, I sat next to a man. I'd never met him before. The first thing I noticed is he was terribly handsome. He told me he was a widower. And what do you do? I asked him. He explained that he'd spent most of his life in business, but had given all of that up to concentrate on a small farm where he grew vines and olives, enough to support him and his family. I looked at him. I couldn't believe it. Dear reader, could I possibly have written him? I pinched myself. Well, what can I tell you? These days, I spend my holidays up an olive tree, often with a glass of rather rough wine. And I can tell you something else, that if I do write volumes 2 and 3, the harvests are going to be unbelievable each year. And I will make sure that Blaise's love life is really, really fantastic. So if you want to write a book, do it for that reason alone. It can make your dreams possibly come kind of true. Anyway, thank you very much.
Anna, thank you so much. That was so delightful and beautiful and so lovely to think about female friendship and also about falling in love and some insight into the creation of your brilliant, brilliant characters. Thank you so, so much. The House of Trelawny is out now, and I hope that everyone will get a copy. So our next speaker this evening is Arja Baba, and we're delighted that she's here to talk to us about consumerism. She's a writer and stylist, and she has over 230,000 followers on Instagram, which is how I have also discovered her. Her work explores the connections between contemporary consumerism, colonialism, and climate change. And her brilliant and thought-provoking new book is out next week, and it's called Consumed. We're really honoured to have you with us today, Arja, and thank you very much. Over to you.
Thank you for having me. What a beautiful and brilliant intro. So to reintroduce myself, hi, I'm Arja. I'm the author of the upcoming book Consumed, and I'm going to try and round up some of the themes in a few short minutes, so bear with me, there's a lot. And before I jump into any of this, I want to say, hello, I used to buy fast fashion. This is a judgment-free zone because to judge you would be to judge myself. As a matter of fact, I used to buy a lot of fast fashion, except I didn't even realize how much I was buying because it was so cheap. So no harm, right? Wrong. I distinctly remember one year in particular when I wasn't earning enough money to move out of my parents' basement yet again, and I had managed to blow a percentage of my salary at one fast fashion retailer alone without even realizing I had. I was furious with myself, but more than anything, I was curious about who else was living like this. And it turns out it's a lot of people, particularly within my generation. So let's talk about habits and how I began to feel really grossed out by this system. Consumerism is fed into our brains as children. So often we don't even question it, and that's why we participate the way we do. You see it everywhere, but especially in the media and movies. That very clever makeover scene that we all actually love from Pretty Woman is hyping consumerism, right? Big mistake, huge. There's always a scene where a character, usually a woman, gets a makeover, and before you know it, the world is treating her differently. So it's no surprise that we inflate these ideas and conflate them with how we spend and why we should buy, but we don't even realize we do it. So while shopping fast fashion, I constantly told myself that this was what I wanted, but I couldn't fight this horrible feeling that something about the price felt really off. It was just too low. And I also couldn't fight the guilt I had every year when I would inevitably bag up bags of fast fashion and send them off to a charity shop because I felt compelled to keep buying. And some of the clothing that I was buying didn't actually last long enough to become permanent pieces of my wardrobe, which means I was making buying mistakes someone else's problem when I would give it to a charity. How did we get here? I seem to remember fast fashion not being a thing when I was a child in the 80s. So what changed? To keep it really frank, fast fashion became our go-to for shopping, and the speed at which we purchase changed, and it has been drastically spurred on with the rise of social media. So let's talk about the environmental impact, but how I got to this place where I was starting to really look at the system sideways. One summer, I volunteered in a local charity shop, and I was doing this to collect shoes for a neighbor who runs a summer camp for kids in South Africa. Sometimes they arrive without shoes and you need shoes. So I basically said, I'll work here all summer long if you give me all the children's shoes that you get. They were great with that. I arrived and I was not prepared for the mountain of used clothing that I was going to be met with every day. That summer, I compared to Prometheus and the Great Eagle. Prometheus gets chained to the rock and he's being punished by Zeus. And every night, an eagle arrives and picks his guts out. And then his guts regenerate, regrow, and the process would start again the very next day over and over again. So I would arrive to these mountainous bags of clothing and go, right, I'm going to get through it. And I would really put my all into it. And I would come back and it would just be like I had done nothing at all, which was really making me feel not that great when I would go to the mall. And what's more important is that we weren't selling it all. There was no way we possibly could. But I knew that the shop that I was volunteering in wasn't unique. And this was a microcosm in thousands of charity shops in America. So what I began to grasp was that this is a looming environmental disaster. I just couldn't think of any other way. I knew that we weren't doing enough with this clothing. So here's where we bring on the first slide. All right, so here is some bummer news. First of all, what you need to grasp is that 100 billion garments are produced every year. Okay, so let's pause here and visualize what a billion looks like, because our brains really struggle with that number. It's 1,000 millions essentially. And to grasp the scale of a billion, I'll use a dollar bill analogy. If you placed $1 billion bills edge to edge, they would wrap around the planet almost 4 times. So just keep that in your head for what comes next. 2, the average garment today is currently worn 7 times. 3, 20% of all items go unsold. So let's say 20 billion items a year. 4, 18 million adults in the US suffer from a shopping addiction. Now, I don't have the numbers for the UK, but I'd be willing to bet that if I sort of scale it up with the population, percentage-wise, it's probably similar. And the reason I say this is because the UK is the biggest fast fashion consumer in Europe. 5, shoppers buy 5 times more clothing today than in 1980. 6, 60% of our garments contain fabrics derived from fossil fuels. Now, a lot of people don't really grasp that fossil fuels are plastic. We talk about plastic and we don't really understand that polyester comes from a fossil fuel, which essentially makes polyester plastic. 7, the average shopper buys 68 items a year. And 8, a t-shirt and a pair of jeans use 5,000 gallons of water to produce. We're talking about growing cotton, etc. So next slide. Here's a few more bummer facts, and then I'm gonna talk about some more elements, but I promise I'll try and leave you on a high note. 1.5 trillion liters of water are used by the fashion industry every year, while 750 million humans in the world do not have access to clean drinking water. 2, 190,000 tons of textile microfibers are released into our ocean every year. When they're released into the ocean, the fish eat it. When we eat the fish, we eat the microfibers. 3, 5.2% of waste in our landfills is textile waste. So I want to go back to, yes, I went on to the next slide. I want to go back to that figure about 20 billion items going unsold. As we hurtle towards climate emergency, one thing you need to keep in mind is we're looking at water shortages. If we're looking at water shortages and 1 t-shirt and 1 pair of jeans uses 5,000 gallons of water to produce, but we know that 20 billion items are being wasted a year, that is endless water being used for clothing we're not even going to wear. But then let's add race and feminism to it. So to put it in the most simplest terms, if you've bought something which isn't from a slow fashion brand recently, I invite you to look at the tag and see where it's made, because there's a very good chance that if it's sold to you from a multinational brand, it's been made in the global South by non-white people being paid very low wages and working in terrible conditions. This system has been brought to you by years of colonialism and exploitation. Can I have the 3rd slide now? And due to this system, we have disasters like the Rana Plaza collapse, which took 1,134 innocent lives. And the workers of Rana Plaza had noticed that there were visible cracks in the building and were forced to work even though they feared for their lives. Through the system of outsourcing, brands can claim ignorance to impending disasters, but remember that every low price we see does indeed have a human cost. At the end of a garment's life cycle, if it doesn't get resold in a store, and most charity shops only realistically sell between 10 to 20% of its donations, it may very well end up in a landfill or in the global South, once again, where non-white people are forced to deal with it. So at the beginning of most garments life cycle, the burden is on non-white people. And at the end, it's the same. But to zoom out even more, 80% of garment workers are women, which makes it a compounding issue of oppression. And these racial lines don't just show up in the clothing manufacturing. It, of course, shows up in magazines and marketing, and who gets to work in fashion, who gets to appear on the runway, who gets to design. So now we move on to our fourth slide, and I want to introduce you to Kantamanto and Accra, Ghana. Kantamanto is Accra, Ghana is one such place that deals with our waste, and it's arguably the largest secondhand retailer in the world. Every week, 15 million items of clothing come to Kantamanto from the global north because the resale market moves at the same pace as fast fashion here. Naturally, retailers there cannot sell all the clothing being dumped in that part of the world. So what happens next is it ends up polluting Accra. Old Fatima is a neighborhood where people literally live side by side with the clothing waste. Additionally, the clothing donations have filled up the municipal dump years before locals had anticipated it would reach capacity. As an American, I can say one thing that Americans don't like is paying for other people's stuff. And if another country just decided to dump stuff on us, everyone would be furious because our tax system then has to mitigate it. That's what's happening there. So people ask about the solutions, and the truth is we've never faced a problem like this. So the solutions are multifaceted. We need regulation. We need industry regulation for workers and industry environmental regulation as well. The market is incredibly unregulated, and because of that, it's like the wild, wild west. And currently brands can pretty much do whatever they want. We also need binding contracts to protect garment workers. Currently, a big company outsourcing all of their labor has all the power, and that has to change. But what I think we need most is we desperately need to change how we buy and consume. And the solutions are going to look completely different to people depending on your privilege and access, and that will determine what you have the power to do. Many of us say we can't afford to shop differently, but I would argue that those with economic insecurities aren't the ones that are keeping the system profitable and building billionaires at the top of the food chain. And if you look at a lot of these brands, there's a lot of billionaires there. So it might be something we need to start questioning. If those of us who are really participating in this system and buying frequently and often step back, I actually think that we could maybe change the game. One thing that we can all afford to do, regardless of where you fall in economic scale, is just buy less clothing and think about what you're bringing into your wardrobe before you bring it home with you. Are you going to wear it 100 times? Or is this just something that you're, buying because you're feeling bad or feeling sad, or you need a little bit of a boost for a job interview or a date? These are all things that we should investigate, and things that I investigate within the book. My name is Arja. I once came to London. I fell in love with this city because of all the great things, but fast fashion was actually a part of that for a long time. And 15 years later, I'm back to tell us all that there's got to be a better way, and Consumed is my story. It's a story of how I found out. It's a story of how I found my way out of the cycle of overconsumption, which not only made me feel pretty bad, but also further funded a corrupt and unethical system. And there's a strong case within the pages for why and how you should maybe consider it too. Thank you.
Arja, thank you so much. I'm so fascinated by your work, and I think that you told your story incredibly compellingly and convincingly. It really is a manifesto for change and to make us all think about what we do with our money. So thank you so, so much. And Consumed is out next week. We're thrilled to have had the chance to have a preview of the ideas from your book. So our final speaker this evening is Rayna Wynn. She is the author of The Salt Path, which charted her extraordinary and uplifting journey around the Southwest coastal path as she battled with homelessness and financial insecurity. The book spent 80 weeks in the Sunday Times bestseller charts and has inspired millions with its tale of the power of nature to heal and resilience and really the human spirit to endure. Her new book is called The Wild Silence, and it's about the challenge of rewilding a Cornish farm. And we are very, very excited that she's with us after completing a 1,000-mile walk. She just got back yesterday. So congratulations on your latest adventures, and over to you, Rayna.
Oh, thanks, Daisy, and lovely to be here, and great to chat to everyone. As Daisy said, I've just got back from a 1,000-mile walk. Well, somewhere around about 1,000 miles. We started walking, my husband Moth and myself, from Cape Wrath in the northwest corner of Scotland, and just arrived back in Cornwall late yesterday. So I'm very unprepared for this. I really wasn't really sure what it entailed until I started listening to the other panelists. So I'm going to just tell you a few things about my books. That might be the easiest way to go about this. I don't know, maybe not. You've read The Salt Path, which was a book I wrote following another long walk, a walk around the Southwest Coast Path, which it follows the coastline of the south of England. But it's probably better to go back a little bit further to explain what that book was about. It sort of originated from a really awful week in our lives, a week when just about everything fell apart. My husband Moth and myself had been together since we were teenagers, and when we were around about 30, we'd bought a property in the hills, and it was like a dream home, a place that we put 20 years of time and effort and money into. But sadly, at the same time, we'd had a dispute with a friend over a financial issue that led to us being served with an eviction notice from that property, and that seemed like the worst thing that could possibly happen to us, was that we were going to lose that home, that family home where our children had grown up, where we'd grown vegetables and kept sheep and repaired every wall and every roof with our own hands. But in that same week, as we were trying to pack 20 years of life into boxes, my husband Moth received a diagnosis for a neurodegenerative illness called corticobasal degeneration, something we'd never heard of, and most doctors we spoke to hadn't heard of either. But it was something that had no treatment and no cure, and we were told by the consultant that really the only thing he could suggest was that Moth should really not get too tired and be very careful on the stairs. So we continued to pack boxes, and it came to the very last moments in our house when the bailiffs were knocking at the door, and we were hiding under the stairs because we just weren't ready for that final moment to step over the threshold, just knowing we'd never go back. And just then in that moment, I spotted a book in a packing case. It was a book written by a young man, a book I'd read years before, about a young man who walked the Southwest Coast Path with his dog. And just then in that awful moment, it just seemed like the most obvious thing to do, just to fill a rucksack and go for a walk. And so that's what we did. Because really, we didn't have many choices, because we had nowhere to go. As we stepped over that threshold for that last time, we became homeless. People without a home was all I thought it would be, because at that point I didn't really know or understand anything about homelessness or what it was or how it was regarded. But really it turned out to be something far more than that, far more than just a word. It became something that consumed us. It became who we were labelled as. But what we'd decided to do was to walk that path. I didn't realise at that point that the Southwest Coast Path is actually 630 miles long. All that it has an ascent that's equivalent to climbing Everest nearly 4 times. Or what that would actually mean, what to actually walk that path carrying a rucksack on my back that contained everything that we needed to survive, what that would actually mean on a day-to-day basis. So we began that walk with no idea of what it would do, other than that we would have a map and it would give us a way forwards. And we followed the headlands of the southwest of England, so through Somerset, North Devon, the whole coast of Cornwall, South Devon, and into Poole in Dorset. We were living wild on the headlands because we had virtually no money. So we were just living on the headlands, sleeping in a tent, couldn't afford to go onto campsites because we couldn't even afford that. And virtually no money to buy food, which became quite an issue after a while, because it's very expensive to buy food on the Southwest Coast Path because it's such a holiday destination. So we did find that we were living mainly on dried packet noodles, which really can wear a bit thin after a while, especially when that's all we've eaten for a week. It really came to such a head with the food crisis as we were walking that after about 200 miles, we really did run out of money, and we ran out of food. And we woke up one day and all we had left was one wine gum in my pocket, a wine gum that was stuck with hair and dust out of the pocket. And I'll never forget that morning as we cut it in half and had half a hairy wine gum each, that we thought we might not actually even survive that walk. But we did, we did. And it changed our lives in ways that we couldn't possibly have imagined. And we went on to actually find accommodation after that walk ended. We did find accommodation, and we moved into a house, into a property, back under a roof. And we thought that we had everything that we needed, and that life would actually just fall into place, and it would all be easy. But what we didn't realise was that the scars of that walk were still with us, and that we would carry those always, and that the prejudice and preconceptions that we'd met as homeless people wouldn't leave us, and that the ability to trust people again would be a really hard-won battle. And that's what my new book, The Wild Silence, is all about. It's about that time when we try to re-enter life after that walk, and how difficult that actually was. It's so bad that in the first few months of moving back under a roof, I found I couldn't settle, I couldn't sleep. It was really, really difficult. And I even put the tent up in the bedroom to try to find some sort of sense of who I was, where I was. And I think I realised then that I'd never lived in a village before. I'd never lived amongst people before. And that what had drawn us to walk that path had been a lifetime connection to nature and the natural world. And it was that was missing from our lives. That was what was missing from my life, and why I was finding it so hard to go forwards again. And it was then, during that time, that I wrote The Salt Path, because Moth's memory was starting to fade, and he was starting to forget things that had been so important to us during that walk. And so I wrote The Salt Path for him, so that he would read it and he would remember something of what that path had been to us. But at the same time, after The Salt Path was published, and strangely and unexpectedly to me, for sure, it was read by many, many thousands of people. Somebody contacted me who'd read the book, contacted me via Twitter to say that he'd read the book and felt that I was somebody who could help them. How could I possibly help anybody? But it turned out that he had a really very old cider farm that had been neglected and sadly agriculturally overused. And he'd read that book and realised how connected to the natural world Moth and I had always been, and felt that we were the ones to help him fulfil a dream of returning the wildlife to the farm and putting the the wildlife back into the hedgerows and bringing back the farm to the point where it should have been. Well, it should have been like a dream come true, but after what we'd gone through during the salt path, it felt impossible decision to make to actually take up his offer, because how could we possibly trust anybody again after not only losing our home because we trusted a friend, but then all those reactions that we'd had from people towards us being homeless people, and how difficult that was to overcome. But eventually the draw of time spent in the natural world and being able to be just out in the environment all the time became too much, and we took up his offer and came to the farm. And now it's a few years on from that point, and those fields where there was hardly any wildflowers or hardly any wildlife have started to change. It's not really what we've done at the farm, it's what we haven't done. What we have done is to take away all that agricultural detritus. What we haven't done is to put on lots of chemical inputs or heavily overgraze the land. And really it's allowed the land to fall back into its natural rhythm. And in doing so, the hedgerows have filled with fruit, and the wildlife has come back. There are birds here, there are insects here that certainly weren't here when we first came. And it's strange to reflect on that, and again in respect of Moth's health and the way it changed while we were walking that coast path. How at the beginning he could barely put his coat on without help. But after about 200 miles of living on those headlands and walking every day, he actually had regained his strength and mobility and clarity of thought that we'd been told was absolutely impossible, because we'd been told that illness was a one-way street, and for the majority of people diagnosed with it, that's what it is. But it wasn't for him, because that path changed. And there's something strange really when you reflect on the comparison between that change in his health and the way the health of this farm has changed, because we've allowed the farm to return to its natural state, and in doing so its health has revived almost as if it was a tap just being waiting to be switched on. And I think there's something to be learnt there, that interactivity between man and nature and man. We put Moth into his natural state there on those headlands, walking every day as we did, and his health returned. And then here at the farm, its health has returned. So when Moth's health really did start to deteriorate quite badly, as it had done over the last winter, we decided we really had to go for another walk. And so we set off on our epic adventure from the northwest of Scotland, and it has turned out to be the most life-changing event, I think, as much so as the Salt Path. We've been through every weather and met so many different people living different lives. And now at the end of that, from Moth's health being at its worst, it's now better than it has been for years, better than it was at the end of the Salt Path. And so I think we've all really to take from that as any sort of feeling of what I've learned from that. I think it's that we're not part of this natural world as observers of it. We're not here watching it and recording what happens. We are part of the natural world. We are the natural world. And whatever happens to it happens to us too. And if we don't find a way to connect ourselves to that natural world and realise the relevance of saving it, then we're not actually realising that it's not just that we're saving ourselves too, because we are the natural world. And I think that's the biggest lesson that we all have to learn right now, is we're not observers. This climate crisis, this ecological, biological crisis that we're living through, it's happening to us. It's not just happening to the birds in the hedgerows, it's all of us. So here we are. Let's try and go on. Thanks, Daisy.
Rayna, thank you so much for being with us. That was such an extraordinary and beautiful story, and such a wonderful way to end this evening. Thank you very much. And I'm just so delighted to hear about Moth, and to hear that your latest walk has been a success, and we can't wait to read about it perhaps in a forthcoming book. But for now, I want to make sure that everyone knows that The Wild Silence is out, and just to say a huge thank you to our incredible lineup of writers, incredible female storytellers, and really just outstanding talks about friendship, about the state of the world today, about the importance of taking a new start and looking afresh at some of our behaviors, and taking new paths in life. It has been a fantastic evening, and we are really honored and delighted to have had you all with us. So the books are out now. Newham Bookshop will be really pleased to help if you want to order from them. But for now, I want to just say a huge thank you to Rayna, to Hannah, Arja, Lucy and Zakiya, and good night from all of us. Good night.